changing in the workforce, right? It's not the workforce of our parents or our parents' parents. We've got multiple generations coming in there. How many of you are working in a facility that you're housing 4 different generations? 4 or 5 even in some cases. Okay, so maybe 25% of the room. And when I say that, there's 4 generations that we're going to get into in a brief second, and I'll explain where the line is drawn for each generation. But as you look at that list scrolling up there, you see a lot of things that we've never experienced before. They're unique to where we are today. Exponential information, we talked about that. Constantly changing skill sets. You know, what you know today may not be an effective tool in a week, in a month. Okay? Energy, becoming green, globalization. How many of you actually thought about China when you were kids? Probably not much, unless you were learning geography. Right? But now, when you hear China, what do you think? What do you think?
Everything's made over there.
Okay, you're thinking money, you're thinking power, wealth, you're thinking where things are made. You know, some of you might even be thinking, when you think of the Asian continent, you might even be thinking every time you pick up the phone to go to customer service. Okay? We're not living in a world where we walk next door and we get something done. We're living in a world where we access people, we're connected to people around the entire planet. Okay? Tom and I were discussing today as we were getting our Starbucks coffee. I was looking at CNN last night. And CNN actually it was CNBC this morning. They did a little blurb of a news story around lobster fishermen. And now you think lobster fishermen, pretty simple life. I wake up in the morning, I go out to my boat, I go pick up my traps, then I go back home, right? Am I concerned about Asia? Am I concerned about Dubai as a fisherman? Okay, traditionally, no. But what we found was that, what CNBC found, was that lobster fishermen are being impacted by the crisis in Dubai today. Because a lot of the residents of the Middle East ship lobsters from Maine to the Middle East. So because of the economy over there, the amount of lobsters being shipped is actually reduced. So Dubai is affecting a Maine lobsterman. Okay, imagine that. You never would have heard that 10 years ago, 5 years ago. You might have even heard of that. But that's the impact of globalization today. Okay, any of you are telecommuters or you're managing telecommuters? Okay, a couple of you are managing it. So a different environment for that, not having your employees right in front of you. So it's a different world, and you probably don't need me to tell you that it's a different world, but hopefully at this point you're going to take all this information and say, all right, now how does this affect me as a manager? What do I need to start looking at? Now we could be here all day, we can be here for weeks talking about each of these individually, but what we really want to focus our attention on are 4 key points. Okay? And those 4 key points are the 4 generations that are in the workforce today. It's time to really start considering this if you haven't at this point, because you're dealing with 4 unique generations of individuals. Let's take a look at them. If you take a snapshot of your workforce, you might have some baby boomers on there, you might have some Gen X on there, some Gen Y on there, you might have some traditional generation, the more seasoned generation, you might have a mixture of that. Each of them are going to need certain things from you as their manager. Okay, certain things. So let's see the age limit so you get an idea of what generation goes with what age. Now, traditional generation is 65 and older, and depending on what study you read or what research you go into, the ages might be tweaked plus or minus 2 or 3 years. But in general, that's usually the bulk of the traditional generation, also known as the Great Generation. For many of us, that's either our parents or our grandparents, and maybe some in the room, great-grandparents. Okay? And I know that it's always a sensitive question to ask, especially I know all you ladies don't want to answer this question, but do I have any traditional generation in the room right now? Anybody from traditional generation? No? At least nobody that wants to admit to it? Okay. Great. What's that?
Are you saying some of us look like
the guys. Most of the guys, ladies. Nah. My wife has me trained very well. Okay. Baby boomers. I know I'll get a lot of hands on this. 45 to 64-year-olds. How many of you are in the room? Okay. Almost 70% of the room, just about. Generation X, 32 to 44. Okay. Another strong group. I saw a couple of hands go up for the baby boomers and the Generation X at the same time. Confused about our age. That's okay. I'm an Xer as well. Okay. Best generation ever, just hands down. So now there's some challenges with that generation too. We'll talk about Generation Y, 18 to 31. Oh, we got a lot of Generation Y in here. Okay, great. Welcome. How many Generation Y is this your first seminar you've ever been to? Okay. How many text messages you sent out this morning? A lot, yeah. And we're going to talk about that. I make light of it, but we'll talk about the unique dynamics with each of these generations. And we're going to start with the traditional generation. Let's start with mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, depending on what your age is. What did you know about the way they managed? How was business for them? What was life like for them in the business world? Think of when you were sitting on grandpa or grandma's lap and she's bouncing you around and saying, oh, I remember when I used to have to walk 20 miles to school barefoot. Okay. What did they tell you about their work?
They worked hard.
They worked hard, absolutely. They what? A lot of manual labor, so there wasn't a lot of the knowledge and intellectual capital that we see today. What else? Mm-hmm. Loyalty. They had the same job forever. They woke up one morning working, and next thing you know, they retired 40 years later in that same job. Okay? And they got a watch for it.
And a pension.
Yeah. And a pension. And a pension. That's right. Anything else you notice about that generation?
Yeah, there was a clear chain of command.
Absolutely. Very clear chain of command, and you didn't go outside of that chain of command or else your head was chopped off. Right? Anything else? Yes?
Say they didn't own a pair of shoes, and everywhere they went it snowed.
And it was uphill. No shoes, snowed, and it was uphill. Okay? 2 hills. All right, so let's take a look at some other things with this generation, the traditional generation. Some of this was already mentioned, loyalty to institutions. They had those jobs and they're going to keep them forever, right? Some of them are still in the workforce, and what we're seeing with their transition is that they want to go into a pseudo-retirement, which is that depending on their careers, where they are in their careers, they want to retire, but they want to be brought on board as a consultant, part-time, for certain projects. So they're dedicated to the workforce still, and they still find meaning in their life in the workforce. Very frugal. Okay? Their consumer trends are a lot different than their children's consumer trends, aren't they? You go into their refrigerators or their cabinets and you see a red milk container, or you see toilet tissue that's store brand toilet tissue. You know, there's no flair to their spending. But now when we start looking at some of the other generations, there's all kinds of name brands, and those things are driving the consumer trends for that generation. Chain of command we talked about, they're great advocates. Okay? Once they're on board and they understand either the direction that you are going, they're there to support you. They've been around the block so many times that they know that even if they disagree with you, they'll take their opportunity to try to steer you right. But once you make the decision to move forward, they're going to shadow you the entire way to be there to protect you from the things that you're about to bump into. So they're great advocates, okay? Lifetime careers, and they typically have a lot of job satisfaction. You don't hear a lot of complaining about their jobs. They're thankful to be employed, okay? Versus some of the other generations where it's a bit more of a challenge to get that kind of feeling towards that level of job satisfaction, okay? So that's our parents, our parents' parents, our parents' parents' parents, depending on your age.